I had no idea what it was. It was quite scary.
There was no way that my son was not going to make it through this surgery.
I think her worst fear was that he was going to die.
His eyes are rolling in the back of his head, and his body was completely limp.
Just do something. Hang up and do something.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. From the day Michael Murray is born, it's clear that he simply isn't normal. But as his features grow more and more unusual, his mother is forced to take matters into her own hands.
I knew something wasn't right. So I just grabbed him and went straight to the emergency room.
Then, on a seemingly ordinary day, little Colin Harvey suddenly becomes unresponsive. And while doctors shrug it off, it's just the beginning of a series of episodes that will send his parents' lives spinning out of control.
I felt fully confident that this was going to happen again. What do I do?
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. For years, Manhattan executives Karen and Jim Murray had looked forward to starting a family. So in the winter of 1991, they were thrilled to learn that Karen was finally pregnant. The entire spring and summer of that year seemed to be spent preparing for their baby's arrival.
I got the room ready. I painted it a neutral color, greens and yellows, because I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. And just really enjoyed my pregnancy.
Everyone was excited about the pending birth. It was good to be together that summer.
She was thrilled. She was expectantly happy, no pun intended.
And on August 13th of that year, Karen goes into labor.
At about 5, I called Jim and basically told him it's time, and Michael was born at 9:28.
Michael Sean arrives weighing a healthy 8 pounds, 8 ounces, and the Murrays are overjoyed.
The first time that I saw Michael, he was beautiful. He was a beautiful baby.
He cried immediately, which is always a good sign. He was a healthy baby, bouncing boy.
But 2 hours later, when the nurse brings Michael into Karen's room, the new mother is caught off guard by one aspect of her son's appearance.
I remember babies having little fists, but Michael's were open. And I remember people looking at his fingers and saying, wow, this is some big baby.
His fingers, instead of being curled up in a ball, were bent back.
So I had asked the doctors right then, what is wrong with his fingers? And they basically reassured me that once he started to hold a bottle, it would look like a normal fist. So I tried to imagine that it was nothing.
But the next morning, a team of doctors gather in her room, unannounced. It's clear from the look on their faces that something is very wrong.
The doctors came in and told me that Michael had a dislocated hip.
The doctors led us to believe that it was a very natural thing and happened quite commonly in childbirth.
Hip displacement in newborns occurs in 1 out of every 1,000 births. The condition can be treated with a hip brace known as a Palvik harness, which keeps the legs apart and at the correct angle. Doctors usually suggest that infants use the harness for 6 to 8 weeks.
It was sort of like a contraption. It fit over his shoulders, down his arms, across his chest, and then it Velcroed all the way down the legs to the toes. I couldn't touch him, hold him, feel his skin, and it just didn't feel like I had a baby to hold and touch.
Unsettled by the turn of events, the young mother worries as to how this could affect Michael's ability to walk later on. But the medical team assures Karen that her son will be just fine.
I remember wanting to treat Michael with kid gloves. I didn't want anyone to touch him.
Sure enough, 8 weeks after the harness was first put on, the doctor gives Michael a thorough head-to-toe exam and declares the infant perfectly healthy.
It felt good to hold him and feel his skin. It was wonderful.
But just as Karen's beginning to relax again, she notices another strange aspect of her son's appearance. Michael's chest is definitely not normal.
Once I took the harness off, I noticed that there was a indentation in his chest bone. I couldn't see it with the harness on. I said, why does he have an indentation in his chest bone? I don't have that at all, and my husband doesn't have that at all.
Alarmed by this new development, the Murrays take Michael back to the pediatrician right away.
It was determined by the doctors that Michael was perfectly normal and that these things would take care of themselves. I believed that everything was going to be okay.
Relieved by the doctor's assurances, the Murrays soon set about the next item on their agenda, finding a nanny for Michael.
I met his nanny, and she was wonderful and warm and sweet, and I thought she would be perfect.
2.5 months after Michael's birth, Karen kisses him goodbye and heads back to work. It's an extremely difficult moment for the first-time mother.
I wanted everything to be perfect. I never, ever thought that things wouldn't be perfect.
But 2 weeks later, on a seemingly ordinary day, Karen gets a phone call that changes everything.
I received a phone call from my nanny saying that Michael was having some problems with his breathing.
The nanny is frantic. Michael is coughing and running a high fever that she can't seem to get under control. Terrified, Karen drops everything and rushes home.
He looked grayish, and his eyes didn't look quite right. So I just grabbed him and went straight to the emergency room. I was in a panic.
Since the day her son Michael was born, Karen Murray has tried to accept that he is different. Michael has abnormally long fingers and a bizarre indentation in his chest bone. But nothing could have prepared her for the day he almost stopped breathing.
I knew something wasn't right, so I just grabbed him and went straight into the emergency room. I was in a panic.
As the doctors take 3-month-old Michael out of Karen's arms, it's all she can do just to keep it together. Michael is coughing uncontrollably and fighting to catch his breath.
It was pretty dramatic.
The on-call doctor is sure something is wrong with Michael's lungs and immediately orders a chest X-ray. 15 minutes later, he has the critical clue he needs to make a diagnosis.
I don't remember much except for them coming out and saying that Michael has RSV virus.
RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, is a very common infection that inflames the lungs and breathing passages. In young children and infants, the virus can lead to long-term respiratory illnesses and, in some cases, death.
Michael was wheeled upstairs and went right into an oxygen tent. And I just remember being really scared.
At certain points, it was pretty severe.
But there is no specific treatment for RSV. All the doctors can do is wait for his little body to fight off the virus.
We stayed in that room together for 10 days. I never went home.
But Michael proves resilient. He's gradually weaned off the oxygen, and less than 2 weeks after his admittance, the Murrays are cleared to take him home. In the months that follow his hospital stay, Karen and Jim are thrilled to see their son growing stronger every day.
He achieved all of his milestones right on time. So he was sitting up and crawling right with my other friends' babies. He was a happy kid. I would go in phases of believing, gosh, maybe everything really is okay.
But always the nervous mother, Karen keeps a close eye on her son's progress. And it isn't long before she spots another unusual development.
Michael never seemed sturdy. He always seemed like he was falling over and like loose. He seemed like a floppy baby.
As time went on, I remember a constellation of things that were different, let's say, than the other children.
Alarmed, Karen begins to wonder if her son could be suffering from a muscular problem and immediately lines up a series of appointments with specialists.
I just kept going to doctors and pursuing some answer. I went to orthopedic doctors, joint disease doctors. After a few evaluations, they chalked it all up to a muscle tone issue.
Doctor after doctor tells her that Michael has hypotonia, or abnormally low muscle tone. In addition to having weak muscles, patients with hypotonia are often capable of extending their joints beyond normal limits, making them appear floppy, like a rag doll.
They started saying, it's no big deal, go for occupational therapy or physical therapy. I took him for 3 or 4 sessions a week because I figured the more I did it, the more stable he would become.
I was taught growing up that you believe what the doctors say, and I did, so I always had confidence that Michael would eventually grow out of these things.
Over the next year, Michael continues with the physical therapy, but there are no marked improvements, and Karen begins to question the diagnosis. Is Michael simply suffering from an extreme case of hypotonia, or could it be something far worse?
The whole thing didn't make sense to me. Is that why his fingers are long? Is that why his chest is indented?
What I remember is the fear and anxiety that Karen was experiencing, but she was met with such resistance by the medical community that, you start going, am I crazy or are they?
But in 1995, when Michael starts preschool, it becomes all too clear that her son is no normal 4-year-old.
I remember the very first day coming to pick him up, and all the kids' heads were the same height, except Michael was head and shoulders above everyone. And I remember stopping dead in my tracks.
Through all the ups and downs of the past several years, it just never dawned on Karen how abnormally tall Michael was. She immediately makes an appointment with a pediatrician, hoping that this new piece of information will help shed light on whatever it is that Michael has.
And I remember the doctor saying, worry when your kid doesn't grow. Don't worry when your kid is growing. You've got nothing to worry about.
At the same time, the doctor does concede that at nearly 4 feet tall, Michael is in the 100th percentile in height for children his age.
I can remember on numerous occasions him saying that Michael is perfectly healthy. He's tall, you're tall, Karen's tall.
Karen desperately wants to believe the doctor's assessment, so she turns her attention to Michael's upcoming birthday. She's planning a big surprise, one that will turn out to be the most important of his young life.
She bought me a brand new computer.
I thought a computer would probably be great for his fingers, and plus he could learn, and I thought it would be wonderful.
Later that night, after Michael has gone to bed, Karen checks out one of the programs on his new computer.
It was called Family Doctor, and I thought I should really think about all of Michael's symptoms and see if I could find out what he has.
At first, Karen is overwhelmed by the seemingly endless list of diseases. But a few hours into her search, she comes across one that sends her reeling.
It was exactly the description of my son. Children grow taller than their peers. Check. Their arms and legs are disproportionately long. Check. Their fingers are long and can be contracted at birth. Check. They could have indentations or protrusions in their chest bone. Check. But the part that scared the living daylights out of me is that his aorta could be weak and it can tear and dissect, causing sudden death.
Over the past 5 years, Michael Murray has learned to live with a series of bizarre physical abnormalities that no doctor seems too concerned about. But now, his mother has come across a potentially fatal disease that appears to fit her son to a T.
So I panicked. Oh my God, it's my only baby and I'm gonna lose my only child. Just horrible. Horrible.
She just brought me right to the doctor. After that, most of it's a blur.
This time, Karen forgoes her usual pediatric specialists and makes an appointment with a local cardiologist, Dr. Bruce Gelb.
And I just remember being hysterical and crying and saying, we have to check and see if he has this. We need to know.
She understood already the implications, so she was quite upset.
Karen hands over Michael's extensive medical file, and Dr. Gelb meticulously reviews it. He then performs a full physical exam on the little boy.
He was 5 at the time and was quite tall for his age, so that's always a start. His fingers were notably long and were quite flexible, and he had the indented breastbone.
I remember them measuring him and saying, if the arm span is longer than the height, that's one of the telltale signs. Oh yeah, he's 3 inches longer than his height. I was frantic.
Michael's excessively long arms are a benchmark for the potentially life-threatening disease. But before Dr. Gelb can confirm the diagnosis, it's imperative that he get a clear look at Michael's heart. So 1 hour later, the 5-year-old undergoes an echocardiogram.
Michael's aorta measured 50% bigger than average for somebody his size. And that clinched the diagnosis for us. We realized that he did have Marfan syndrome.
Marfan syndrome is a rare connective tissue disorder. In healthy patients, connective tissue serves as a sort of glue that supports organs, blood vessels, bones, joints, and muscles. But in patients like Michael, this glue is weaker than normal because of a defect in their body's production of a protein called fibrillin. As a result, their connective tissue is diminished, which ultimately leads to unusual growth and development within the body.
We all know that we have things like ligaments and tendons that help hold bone to bone and muscle to bone, and connective tissue plays a large role in those sorts of tissues.
Connective tissue also plays a critical role in the cardiovascular system, and the fibrillin defect can lead to a weakening in the walls of major blood vessels like the aorta.
We're talking about the portion of the aorta right after it leaves the heart. Michael's aorta measured 2.6 centimeters. To put it in perspective, at that point, it would have been an average size for somebody a little bit bigger than his mom.
It's relief at knowing, but devastation over knowing what it is. It's a really tough realization.
When you hear something that you're not totally familiar with, you're scared of the unknown, and it was quite scary.
As Dr. Gelb explains Marfan syndrome, it becomes clear that the disease first revealed itself during Michael's birth, when his hip was easily dislocated due to the weak connective tissue in his body.
I think it's fair to assume in Michael that the dislocation was certainly related to his Marfan syndrome.
The syndrome also caused certain bones to overgrow, resulting in a lanky appearance and Michael's concave chest.
The long bones of the hands, arms, and legs are particularly responsive to this. The breastbone, at the end of the day, is a bone, and sometimes it winds up sort of curving out, and sometimes it winds up curving in.
But one event that is not related to Marfan syndrome was Michael's early hospital stay for RSV.
RSV is a viral infection. It's very common. Most all of us have had it at one time or another.
With all of the facts finally laid out on the table, Karen and Jim are anxious to know what this all means for their only child.
I think her worst fear, though, was that he was going to die.
Now, the Murrays must face a devastating reality. There is no cure for the disease, and it can turn fatal at any moment.
As the aorta balloons out, the wall gets thinner and thinner, and at a certain point, if we do nothing, that wall will start to give way, what we refer to as aortic dissection. And that really is pretty much instantly lethal.
The good news is that with proper monitoring, they should be able to manage Michael's symptoms. First and foremost, Michael will need to restrict his physical activities to prevent overtaxing his cardiovascular system. In addition, he'll have to have his aorta monitored every 3 to 6 months for the rest of his life.
I got to understand more and more why they're doing echoes, and then I started to know more about it every day.
The beauty of Michael is that he never complained about it and has accepted it from day one.
Overwhelmed by it all, the Murrays can't help but wonder why every doctor who examined Michael over the previous 5 years could have missed his textbook symptoms.
It takes time for the aspects that we as physicians are capable of recognizing. At age 5, it was early. Many of the patients we're diagnosing are in their teens already.
Over the next 10 years, Michael grows into a charming young man, and while life is seemingly perfect for the Murrays, they're constantly aware of the fact that at any moment, Michael's heart could give out.
One of the reasons why the aorta is measured on a consistent basis is to determine its growth, and once it reaches a certain size, then elective surgery is recommended. You just never know how quickly the aorta is going to grow.
Then, in 2007, the family suddenly comes face to face with their worst fear. A routine screening reveals that if Michael's aorta stretches just 1 more millimeter, he could die without warning.
I really just didn't think it would have to come that fast. I thought it would be much later on.
He was just incredibly mature about it. I so many times wish that I could have it over your child.
3 weeks later, Michael is wheeled into the OR for open heart surgery.
What I really was concerned about is putting him out, knowing that they were going to crack open his chest, put him on a heart-lung blood machine, and for a while that he wouldn't be with us.
Over the next 8 hours, the surgeon carefully replaces the weakened section of Michael's aorta with a synthetic tube that will never stretch out and will last for the rest of his life.
After the surgery, I just feel healthier overall. I feel like I'm just more open to do things.
He really healed beautifully, and kids are resilient. It's amazing.
Today, 12 years after being diagnosed, 17-year-old Michael is 6'7" and a senior in high school. While his condition will always need to be monitored, the future does look bright.
We're very optimistic. He'll always need to be watched, and certainly we would expect lifespan-wise that he should do great.
If my mom didn't keep trying and striving, then who knows where I'd be today.
He's very social. He does well in school and has such a great outlook on life. It's a dream come true.
My greatest hope is that he can live a normal life. What makes me proud of him is the way that he's dealt with this entire situation. He's my hero.
While Michael Murray's family saw the first signs of his bizarre disorder at birth, no one in young Colin Harvey's family ever suspected that their whole world could come crashing to a halt almost overnight. In the summer of 2004, Wisconsin natives Christian and Jennifer Harvey were excitedly expecting their third child. With 10-year-old Emily and 3-year-old Grace already part of the happy family, Christian had a particular wish.
When I found out that Jennifer was pregnant, I was really hoping it would be a boy.
As Jennifer's due date approaches, the family plans to spend a free weekend setting up the nursery. But to their surprise, Jennifer suddenly goes into labor 3 weeks early.
In the middle of the night, I woke my husband up. I said, "This isn't a false alarm anymore. You need to get up. We need to go now."
And it was excitement, but also I was a little bit nervous seeing that it was 3 weeks early.
But the young father's nervousness quickly fades when a healthy son, Colin Glenn Harvey, is born on the 4th of July, 2004.
You happy you had a brother?
Yeah.
Colin's first year seems to fly by. But that fall, when the cold Wisconsin weather hits hard, Colin begins coming down with a series of ear and respiratory infections. Each time, the Harveys take him in to see the family pediatrician, Dr. Jeffrey Britton.
Colin had several
visits for respiratory infections, some of which were ear infections and some of which were cough infections.
Dr. Britton assures the Harveys that they have nothing to worry about.
Every illness that comes through the community seems to hit a daycare room. It's a very common problem.
I just thought, well, maybe he's got a lower immune system than a normal person.
But in January of 2006, Colin is stricken with an alarming new symptom that sends his parents reeling.
He was coughing a lot. It was insane. I'd begun wondering if, there was just something more serious going on.
Startled by the new development, Jennifer rushes her son back in to see Dr. Britton, who performs a comprehensive exam and takes several x-rays.
The chest x-ray revealed a pneumonia on the right side. Pneumonia is a bacterial infection that can happen on top of the cold.
That really had gotten me worried because that's something that jumps out.
Dr. Britton prescribes an aggressive course of antibiotics to help clear up Colin's fragile lungs. And over the next few weeks, the Harveys carefully monitor his condition. But in the middle of it all, a strange new symptom suddenly emerges.
I remember Colin drinking just excessive amounts of water. And within 20 minutes, he'd have drinking so much that his diaper would fall to his feet. We'd put a new diaper on him, and literally 20 minutes later, boom.
The first thing they tell you when your kid is sick is to keep them hydrated, and we didn't even have to work to do that.
And then, early one morning, as Christian is getting the children ready for school, Colin takes a terrifying turn for the worse.
His body was completely limp, and you'd lift his head up and his neck would just fall backwards.
Petrified, Christian makes a frantic call to Jennifer, who is already at work.
Right away, he said, "There's something wrong with Colin. What do I do?"
He seems like he's passing out right in front of us. His eyes are rolling in the back of his head.
I said, "Take him to the hospital right now or call the ambulance. Just do something. Hang up and do something."
Over the past 5 months, 17-month-old Colin Harvey has endured a series of seemingly endless infections, a terrifying bout of pneumonia, and a strange, unquenchable thirst. Now, he suddenly collapsed for no apparent reason, and his father is racing him to the emergency room.
And wasn't really sure what had happened.
It was kind of a scary morning because we didn't know what was going on.
As Christian walks into the ER with his son lying limp in his arms, the on-call doctor begins an immediate evaluation.
Things at that point started escalating. It was almost like he was in pain. It was scary.
As the Harveys bring the doctor up to speed on Colin's long list of symptoms, one in particular stands out.
Out of all the problems that he had, a lot of them were respiratory type issues. Now all of a sudden we're dealing with another element that wasn't on the radar screen. Thirst is a symptom of being diabetic.
Patients with diabetes are unable to produce sufficient amounts of the hormone insulin, which breaks down sugars, starches, and other foods into energy. If Colin is diabetic, it's possible that his rapid decline is the direct result of skyrocketing glucose levels. But the way to know for sure is a blood test.
He was unresponsive to the environment around him. He slept through it all.
Depleted is the word. I mean, he was just wiped out.
But when the lab results come in, they're nothing short of shocking. Colin's numbers are the exact opposite of what the doctor was expecting. A normal blood glucose range is between 80 and 100 milligrams per deciliter, but Colin's blood sugar level is dangerously low.
It was in the 40s. So the doctor was like, obviously this child is not diabetic.
On the contrary, the blood test is a clear indicator that Colin is in fact hypoglycemic. His body is desperately short on glucose, and if the supply runs too low, the 17-month-old could easily slip into a coma.
That was just awful. I don't think we fully knew how bad that was going to be.
The ER staff immediately puts Colin on an IV of a glucose solution to raise his blood sugar levels. Once he's stabilized, the doctor explains to the concerned parents that there's no specific treatment for hypoglycemia. They just need to make sure that Colin eats regularly to maintain an adequate glucose level. If he ever appears lethargic or shaky, a piece of candy should bring him back around.
And really, the only advice that we were given was make sure you feed him dinner. Your other kids, they may have been able to miss a meal. Colin can't do that.
Jennifer takes the doctor's advice to heart. For the next several weeks, she makes sure that Colin eats regular meals with plenty of carbohydrates to keep his energy levels up. But less than a month later, the Harvey's world spins out of control yet again.
Dad.
We went to get Colin ready, and his hands shook real bad. We had a good idea that his blood sugar was low. I remember the girls grabbing mini marshmallows and giving them to eat.
He was trying to put his head down and closing his eyes and kind of refusing to take the food.
Terrified to see his son deteriorating so quickly again, Christian races him back to the ER. As soon as he arrives, the medical team checks Colin's glucose levels.
His blood sugars were still low, even though we had given him some marshmallows to eat.
The doctor administers an oral electrolyte solution to raise the amount of glucose in Colin's blood. Slowly, the little boy comes back around. And once he's stabilized, the doctor turns his attention to the Harveys. He needs to know about Colin's last meal.
The night prior, he had eaten a late lunch, and he had gone to bed about 6 o'clock. We didn't wake him up, but I didn't think that that was unusual. I was told that I hadn't fed him enough.
While the ER doctors seem to brush off Colin's second episode of hypoglycemia as the result of a missed meal, the Harveys are now on red alert. They're sure that something is very wrong with their son.
Unfortunately, I felt fully confident that this was going to happen again. Okay, fine. I will acknowledge the fact that, I did not feed my son dinner. And I will never let this happen again. But assuming I fed him dinner and it happens again, what do I do?
Colin Harvey, just 20 months old, has had 2 hypoglycemic episodes in the past 3 weeks. And when the emergency room staff seems to blow off their concerns about potential future attacks, his parents head directly to the family pediatrician, Dr. Jeffrey Britton.
Here was a child who had 2 episodes of symptomatic hypoglycemia. Therefore, there must be something wrong.
Dr. Britton promises the family that he'll help them get to the bottom of Colin's case. That same afternoon, he contacts his colleague, geneticist Dr. Bill Reed, who specializes in rare metabolic disorders.
He called me up and told me that he had a young boy with a couple of episodes of hypoglycemia that were unexplained.
Dr. Reed knows there's only one way to get a better understanding of what's going on inside Colin's body. The young patient will need to undergo a fasting test.
Dr. Reed had suggested we bring Colin into the hospital, have him fast until his blood sugar dropped low enough in a setting where we could measure it right away, do the blood test we needed to do, and then give him some IV glucose and bring his blood sugar right back up.
By that time, I'm like, all right, let's get going. We need to figure this out.
Just 10 days later, Colin is admitted to the hospital.
He went to the hospital, got there around 5 p.m., ate a light supper then, and had the IV placed. And then we let him sit there fasting.
But at 4 a.m., Jennifer is taken aback by the sudden and terrifying change in her son's condition.
His blood sugar, once it hit a certain point, started dropping really fast. Dropping. All of a sudden, it was like he wasn't responsive.
Petrified, all the Harveys can do is look on as members of the medical team rush in to take blood samples.
We got a blood sugar that dropped below 50. That was our magic time for drawing and sending off a long list of laboratory tests.
With the samples in hand, the doctor immediately administers a glucose IV to raise Colin's blood sugar back to normal.
He had been almost unconscious. 3 hours later, he's fine. He's eating, he's smiling, he gets dressed, and he walks out. That just shows the deceptiveness of this. I just wanted whatever was wrong with Colin to be identified and to be something that wasn't life-threatening.
24 hours later, the test results are in, but the findings do little to ease the worried parents' minds.
We had eliminated a lot of other possibilities from the results of the fasting test. Disorders on the short list after that test were disorders that involved glucose and carbohydrate metabolism in the body.
Dr. Reed explains to Jennifer and Christian that while he's figured out this one piece of the puzzle, he still needs to pin down exactly what's causing Colin's body to shut down. And the only way to do that is to test his DNA. Unfortunately, it's going to take 5 months for the results to come in.
I thought about it all the time.
That was consuming me. I'm not sure how much energy I had left to do anything else but what had to be done on a daily basis. At that point, I was so numb. It was just day by day.
The ensuing weeks are the longest of both parents' lives. Then, a few months before Colin's DNA test is due in, they begin to notice a disturbing new symptom.
Coordination-wise, he was very on target. Verbally, very behind. Could say da-da, and that was da-da-da-da-da. And, eventually he picked up a couple other words, mama.
By 18 months, most children have several words that they can speak. In Colin's case, he wasn't speaking very many words yet at age 18 months, but every child is a little bit different. By age 2, however, Colin was not putting 2-word sentences together.
Colin was at about 5 to 10 words, and most kids his age had a vocabulary of about 250. So it was very significant. We still really didn't know what was wrong with him. Watching the progression, we all just kind of felt deflated. It was a hard time. It was a lot to take in.
The Harvey family has been anxiously waiting for DNA test results that they hope will shed some light on what's been causing their toddler to black out and fall far behind in his speech development. Then, on a crisp fall day, the phone rings. It's Dr. Bill Reed, and he wants to meet with them immediately.
When we got the call saying they have the results, come on in, I'm thinking, why do we got to drive all the way down to hear the results?
There's a fear of the unknown.
But nothing could have prepared the Harveys for what the DNA results reveal.
The easiest way to get a diagnosis was just simply to do a number of DNA tests for a category of diseases, and it worked well for us with Colin. The results fit rather well with his clinical findings that he has congenital hyperinsulinism.
Congenital hyperinsulinism, or CHI, is an inherited genetic metabolic disorder that causes low blood sugar. In healthy individuals, the pancreas produces insulin to help break down glucose consumed in carbohydrate-rich foods. However, in patients like Colin, the pancreas is blind to the blood glucose level and never stops producing insulin. As a result, their blood sugar levels can drop extremely low unless a patient is consuming a steady stream of calories.
We had a definite name, a diagnosis. Now we just had to figure out how to keep Colin healthy.
Colin's problem is essentially the opposite of diabetes. He makes too much insulin instead of not enough.
In turn, the excess insulin in Colin's system rapidly burns through the glucose that his body needs for energy. As that runs out, hypoglycemia can quickly set in.
Hypoglycemia brings on very rapid changes in brain function and alertness and awareness. And it's progressive. First you get grouchy and or hungry. Trembling and shaking is very common. Then you can be asleep, and then you reach the point where you start getting active, severe brain damage. hypoglycemia. It's exactly like being drowned and then revived.
While the family does their best to get a handle on the complicated diagnosis, Dr. Reed walks them through everything he knows about CHI and how it's been presenting in Colin. He suspects that his most recent speech delays are directly linked to the disease.
It doesn't take very much hypoglycemia to interfere with the very highest brain functions. And speech is a very complicated brain activity, so his speech delays sadly might result from hypoglycemia.
Surprisingly, the series of chronic infections Colin's experienced since the day he was born are most likely not connected to CHI.
Some kids have a respiratory infection every month or 2 a month during the winter virus season. He's just a little on the unlucky side.
Still, the Harveys wonder if they should have recognized symptoms like Colin's excessive thirst as a sign of a larger problem.
Colin was thirstier that day because he had been sick and had not been drinking or eating well.
He might have been needing calories and food and glucose, and that manifested itself as excessive thirst.
While the Harveys are relieved to finally have a diagnosis, they can't help but wonder why no other doctor could identify the seemingly obvious clues.
Children with severe hyperinsulinism problems present earlier in life, in the newborn period. So the fact that Colin got through 1.5 years of life before we figured this out, I think made hyperinsulinism lower on the list. It's also a very rare disorder.
We don't see it very often. I've only seen it 2 to 3 times in an almost 30-year career.
With the diagnosis in hand, Dr. Reed explains what the family will need to do in order to prevent any more attacks. For the rest of Colin's life, his blood glucose levels will have to be checked at least twice a day.
If his blood sugar goes below 80, we need to make sure he eats. You never, ever, ever want his blood sugar to drop below 60. If his blood sugar is below 50, it's a medical emergency.
The bottom line is that if he were to go a day without eating, he could potentially die, even a day. And that kind of is a hard fact that hits home.
Today, Colin is a lively 4-year-old. He's on a strict diet high in protein and complex carbohydrates that provide his body with slow-burning fuel for energy.
A food that is high in simple sugars may cause Colin to release insulin more rapidly, so we try to keep his diet low in simple sugars and higher in complex carbohydrates.
Before bed, we usually give him an apple and milk, and it helps stabilize the blood sugar overnight. Cereals that we buy are also under 11 grams of sugar, no exceptions.
Luckily, Colin's condition is manageable, and the Harveys are focused on keeping it that way.
He does have a significant speech delay, but he works with a speech therapist. I'm not sure how long it will take for him to catch up speech-wise, but hopefully. My goal is to manage Colin's condition in a way that allows him to have a healthy life.
The way I see him at 4 right now, he's unbridled. He's on the go constantly. And my hope is that throughout his life, he can stay that way.